Revelation 17, 1 through 5, and verse 15. If you're ready for the word of God, would you signify that by saying amen? Amen. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with me, saying to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot, who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication." So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And then in verse 15, then he said to me, "The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues." Okay, you can be seated. Thank you. That actually refers to the 3rd verse, the 15th verse. So as we closed our last lesson, we were looking at how throughout history, Babylon has been an important center of the false religion. And in the end times, false religion will come back, and it will come back actually to where it originally started. The devil that deceived people at Babylon will deceive the world once again. And the final world religion is depicted here as a harlot. Okay, remember last week? Harlot. And that's the theme of this vision as we examine this vision. And the vision will record for us, it's going to show us 3 things. It's going to show us the exposure of the harlot, the explanation of the harlot, and then the extermination of the harlot. And so let's begin with the exposure of the harlot. Since it was, as our text says, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me. So there's a connection. Purposefully, there's a connection between the judgment of the harlot and the 7 plagues. You see why? Because one of the angels who had one of the 7 bowls, which are the bowls of judgment, now comes and talks to John. And as we've already discussed, chronologically, we've stopped here. After the last chapter, after chapter 16, we've stopped time, and we're now discussing other matters in these 2 chapters that we begin tonight. The scene has shifted from God's judgment to a picture. We're going to get a broad picture of Antichrist world empire, which is in reality the target of those judgments. Okay? We're going to get an explanation of how this world system works, and then we're going to see how those judgments targeted that system. Of course, the great harlot, as she is called, is a metaphor. And that word's a metaphor for false religion. It can be considered a metaphor for spiritual defection, a metaphor for idolatry, and a metaphor for religious apostasy. Besides Babylon, there have been several cities in Scripture that have been designated harlot cities. Can you think of any of them? Such as? Nineveh is one of them. Anyone else? There's 3 that I can think of. The harlot cities, Nineveh. Yeah, we know that. You're right. That would make 4. Nineveh, Tyre, and then one you may not think of is Jerusalem. Is described as a harlot city. Isaiah 12, or Isaiah 1. Isaiah 121 describes Jerusalem in that. And in that instance, these are all cities that have committed what we would consider to be spiritual fornication. So John's vision is going to expose us to several aspects of the harlot city of Babylon, okay? And we call it a harlot city, but remember, the idea here is symbolism. So the harlot in John's vision sits in a position of authority and sovereignty, like a king or a queen, on a throne which is beside or on, she sits on a throne beside many waters, okay? And in ancient civilization, one of the most important things to have for a big city was water. Many of your great cities had good, fresh water supply, be it rivers, lakes, springs, etc. And that was true of the literal city of Babylon. Remember on the Euphrates River? Think of Egypt with the Nile River. All your great ancient civilizations had a source of water. So when it refers to water, water is an indicator of great power. In Jeremiah 31:13, the city, the ancient city of Babylon, is actually addressed as you who dwell by many waters. And that same phrase that is applied in this passage, and that will be actually applied to the future Babylon. Just as the proud capital of the Babylonian Empire took her seat beside many waters, so will the Babylonian harlot city of the future. So when you think many waters, you're not thinking waters, you're thinking power, okay? She has great power. As the ancient civilizations, the greatest civilizations always sat beside great water. The phrase so we're not using that phrase, many waters, as a geographic location. Instead, as it is explained in verse 15, the waters which you saw where the harlot sits are, so what are the waters? They are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. So what does that mean? Remember, that's a technical phrase, and that's a technical phrase for the population of the earth, specifically for non-believers. So the city, symbolically, is situated in a commanding position where it holds power over the peoples, the multitudes, the nations, and the tongues of the earth. And the harlot's authority, so when you think about, okay, who falls under the authority of the harlot? Everybody that doesn't fall under the authority of the true God. Okay? There's no in-between, there's no middle road for humanity in this situation. The entire world will be committed to the false worship of the Babylonian system. And I'll include this one. Well, I'll talk about that later. So anyone that doesn't trust the true God will fall under the authority of the harlot, and she'll have this worldwide authority. So who is the harlot allied with? Who does she make alliances with? Well, our text tells us she's associated with the kings of the earth, it describes in verse 2. And that reveals the scope of her influence. She will have a great influence. And she will have influence at the highest levels of power. And she will influence all those that are associated with her to commit spiritual fornication with her. The phrase used, committed fornication, is translated from the Greek verb porneo, which means to commit sexual immorality. And it's an apt description of the harlot's interaction with these kings of the earth. Okay? The symbolism is a symbolism of spiritual idolatry, a spiritual adultery. Yeah, you know what I mean. The picture is one of those that are deceived to the point of, for lack of a better phrase, of getting in bed with the false religion. In the Old Testament, use those kind of phrases very often to describe Israel's apostasy from Jehovah. Oftentimes, when you read in the Old Testament, when Israel was in remission, spiritual remission, she was described as committing spiritual fornication. The unredeemed rulers in the nations they represent do not know God and have no intention of following God, and they will follow the harlot. So, in reality, rulers from around the world, to get what is one of man's greatest ambitions, especially politics. People want power. They want power and influence. And the rulers of the world will see this as their opportunity for power and influence. And for them to find themselves in this condition, it means that they have to have a level of obsession. They'll be deceived by the false prophet, Antichrist, and Satan and his demon host, and they'll become enamored with the false world religion. It's as we read in 13:8. It says, "All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. All who dwell on the earth will worship him." But having joined themselves to the harlot economically, socially, militarily, politically, and religiously, they will all share the harlot's end fate. Okay? But you've got to understand, the only way to get all of these people under one umbrella is one thing: religion. The religion is the only thing that speaks to the heart of all men. God, remember we've learned, God has placed inside us a worship gene. We want to worship, and we're going to worship. We're going to worship the true God, and we're going to find something else to worship. So the harlot will not be aligned just with the rulers and the influential people of the world, but as the text continues to explain, the inhabitants of the earth. Again, a phrase for unbelievers. And it says they were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. All the world's unredeemed will be caught up in this final false religion. They will give their hearts and their souls to the abominable Babylonian harlot. They will sell out. To remember what's going on. Because there will be no doubt in people's minds that there are two sides. There will be no doubt that there is a gospel, and there will be no doubt that there is an Antichrist. And people will make up their mind, and they will be fervent believers of one or the other. There won't be any milquetoast Christians. Okay? There won't be any casual believers. There won't be any Sunday morning believers. There will be believers that are 24/7, or there will be opposers that are 24/7. So all the redeemed will be caught up in this final false religion, and they will give their hearts and their souls to the harlot. And of course, the angel here is not describing people that are physically drunk with literal wine, that are committing sexual immorality with an actual prostitute. That's what the words say when you take them apart. Instead, what is being talked about here are those that are passionately intoxicated with the Antichrist illicit false religion. Okay? And the imagery here derives from Jeremiah 51:7. Jeremiah 51:7, which says of the ancient Babylon, it says, Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand. Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunk. The nations drank her wine, therefore the nations are deranged. Okay? Pointing the way from the original Babylon to the ultimate Babylon. Now, before the next alliance of the harlot is revealed for us, John's vision changes scenes. And it says, the angel with whom he had been speaking, he says, carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. is today. Have you ever looked at the map where Babylon is today? Have you ever looked where, what's his name, Hussein started to rebuild Babylon? It's kind of out in the desert because, the rivers don't run like they once ran. The rivers will run when the polar ice caps start melting and stuff. A lot of those rivers will run again, but there's not anywhere near as much water. But what is described here is a very desolate wasteland. And in that place then, John says, he saw a woman, and this is again the Babylonian harlot, whom the angel has just described for us. And what is she doing? She's sitting on a scarlet beast. And what would a scarlet beast be? Who would that identify?
Antichrist?
The Antichrist, exactly. And Ron can tell you, if you're sitting on a beast, what does that mean? Hopefully, you have control of that beast at that particular moment. So, in a way, she's sitting on the scarlet beast, which is Antichrist, and since she's sitting, it's not so much that she's controlling, it's the idea more of, like if a horse really wants to go somewhere, it's going to go. It's the idea more of the Antichrist, the beast supports her. That's the way I would rather think about it. Rather than her controlling it, the Antichrist lifts her up, supports her. And the initial unifying and controlling factor of the Antichrist kingdom, the first thing that the Antichrist will control, it will be this religion. It's the foundation of Antichrist's kingdom. With the heavens and the earth being ravaged by God's judgment, okay, and the world's top political, economic, and military might crumbling all around people, they're going to turn to two things, and they're intertwined. They're going to turn to supernatural religions. This morning I spoke to you how many evangelical churches are turning towards ritualism in their services. I think that you'll see in the future, you'll see churches turn more and more to supernatural occurrences in their services as Antichrist prepares the world for the introduction of his final religion. And the beast and the woman, we know, are going to coexist for a while, are they not? For a while, religion will be separate from the kingdom of Antichrist at first. Okay? But eventually, as we'll see later in verse 16, she is, what happens to the harlot? He, the beast, will consume her. He being the Antichrist. Why? What happens? Listen, there's a false religion, okay? Initially, the false religion is not to worship the Antichrist. But after the abomination of desolations, what happens? What becomes the world religion? The Antichrist. The Antichrist consumes the harlot. He eats the world's false religion, and he then becomes the world's false religion. The whole world will be required to worship Antichrist, and everything will be one under the beast, universal and comprehensive rule. That'll be really, so you have the introduction of religion, a false religion, which begins controlling the people's lives. As that religion is introduced, the Antichrist begins to consolidate power all over the face of the globe, politically, economically, and every other way. As he consolidates his power all over the face of the globe, he gets bold enough after 3.5 years to enter the temple and declare that he's God. He then consumes the false religion. That religion is now expired, and now you will worship me. He becomes so emboldened that you now will worship him. So the false religion is not the worship of Antichrist. The false religion is the system that was set up originally at Babel. And I think I'll start on that system probably at the end of next week's lesson. I'll be able to finish the harlot, and then we'll go into that actual, what the peculiarities and the particulars of that religion.
Do you think that, excuse me, do you think that that's like the humanistic secularism that we worship, the world basically worships today?
That's
The start?
That's part of it. It's a conglomeration of everything. But you'll see, what was the Tower of Babel? It says, if you remember we looked at last week, what did those people want to do? What was their,
They reach God.
what did it say they wanted to do? It says, Genesis says, they wanted to make a name for themselves. They wanted to become God. Exactly, all your answers are correct. But, so, and that is,
Secular human.
yeah. That is what we're experiencing today in so many ways, in so many theaters. See, it's not only that secular humanism hasn't only crept into the church, it's crept into education, it's crept into everything. And all of these influences will ultimately come together. And in that way, Antichrist will be able to be so emboldened that eventually he will declare himself to be God. Now the beast is described, what color is she? Scarlet. And scarlet is a color in the word that's associated with luxury, that's associated with splendor, with royalty. It's also a color that in Scripture is associated with sin, and it's a shade of blood. And the Antichrist will be a splendorous, I think that's a word. If it wasn't, I added it to my dictionary in my computer. The Antichrist will be splendorous, will be royal, will be sinful, and a bloody beast. Okay? As the text says, he will be full of names of blasphemy. So in his arrogant self-deification, Antichrist will take for himself the names and the titles that belong to God. He will call himself the Most High. He will call himself Jehovah Jireh. He will adopt all the names, and he will require his followers to call him by those names. That's what it means when he is full of names of blasphemy. So he's not only going to blaspheme God by what he claims, but also what he says. Antichrist, remember in Daniel 7:25 it says, Antichrist will speak out against the Most High, and he will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. So that's his intent. So the demonic scarlet beast is further described for us in the source text as having 7 heads and 10 horns. And that shows the extent, then we go back to his alliances. As we will see when we get to verses 9 and 10 next week, the 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other one has not yet come. And we'll discuss that next week. And when he comes, it says that he must continue for a short time. And these represent 7 past, present, and future. These are governments. And the 10 horns represent, what do horns represent always? They're always kings, right? Who rule as subordinates. These are the Antichrist subordinate rulers around the globe. And the harlot has an alliance with these, and it will be a very comprehensive alliance. And her deadly embrace will encompass all the unredeemed, from the kings and rulers, all the way down to the common people. All will worship and have to submit to her religion. Nobody will fall through the cracks. They will know everything about everybody. They'll know all about you. They'll know your name, your address, what's wrong with you. They're going to try to tap into all of the information that pertains to you as an individual, so that they can control you.
He started already.
now, though, the one thing that one of the greatest cries of the humanists is that there has to be a separation of church and state, is it not? There will be no separation of church and state. In fact, under this system, church and state will be intertwined as they have never been before. That's on your outline, church and state. So these then are the alliances of the harlot. So what's the harlot wearing? Because everything tells us something. It's a known fact that prostitutes dress in overcoats with snow boots. Prostitutes dress to attract people to themselves. And metaphorically, the harlot Babylonian will be no different from them. John sees her in verse 4, he says, she is arrayed in purple and scarlet. Those are the colors of royalty, prosperity, ability, the colors of wealth. And then she is adorned how? With gold and precious stones and pearls. So she is a prostitute who is dressed very nicely, attractively, and she has been very good at her job because she has a lot of wealth. And that's portrayed in the gold, the precious stones, and the pearls. That's the apparel of the harlot. So let's look at her abominations. As a further indication of her wealth, the harlot has in her hand, it says, a golden cup, okay? People will tell you that prostitutes, once a prostitute gets to know a regular customer, she will attempt to take everything she can from that customer. She will attempt to acquire all of her riches, or his riches. And here we see how this harlot, she will make her victims drunk. As we read earlier in Jeremiah 51:7. Babylon was a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunk. The nations drank her wine, therefore the nations are deranged. And then this phrase here, in her hands a golden cup. Barnhouse, Donald Gray Barnhouse, who is one of my favorite commentarians, has a comment on this in his expository commentary. He says, it's highly significant that the abominations and filthiness should be spoken of as being contained in a golden cup. Those who are acquainted with the history of ancient religions will see the significance when comparing this with the rites of pagan religious mysteries. Drinking is almost always a significant part of demon ceremonies as practiced in the occult world. Remember one of the issues at the church in Corinth? What were they doing prior to the Lord's Supper? They were getting drunk. And there was a guy off in the corner denouncing Jesus Christ. But what Barnhouse is saying, drinking is almost always a significant part of demon ceremonies as practiced in the occult world. Almost always, one wishing to be initiated into these religious mysteries was required to drink from a cup filled with mysterious beverages. These mysterious beverages most often were combinations of wine, honey, water, and flour mixed together with the intent of acute intoxication. There can be no doubt that these beverages were designed to be highly intoxicating, and that was their express intent. Since it was not until the individual taking them was under their control that they were considered to be properly prepared for what they were to see, for what they were to hear, and for what they were to do. Okay? So Barnhouse makes a correlation, this golden cup, with the ceremonies of pagan mystery religions. And remember, idolatry, whatever the idol is abominable to God. And the gross idolatry of the Antichrist false religion will be the worst that there has ever been. Babylon, 18:5 says, Babylon's sins will be, it says, piled as high as heaven. That's the sin quotient of Babylon. So in Roman times, prostitutes always identified themselves. They had their name placed on their clothing. And here you have the harlot Babylon, and it says that it is written on her forehead, a name was written. And her name is Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Now some versions will show mystery, will not show mystery as part of her title. But I believe that mystery is best understood as part of her title. She's called Mystery Babylon to indicate that Babylon in this context does not refer to a geographical location. This is Mystery Babylon. This is a thought process. This is a system, not a place. This is not ancient Babylon. This is not the Babylon of John's day. This is not the rebuilt city of Babylon in the end times. The details of this vision really can't be applied to any city. This goes beyond that. Here we have really what we have addressed here for us is an previously undisclosed Babylon. This is like new material in the Bible where we get a chance to understand the origins of pagan, how false religion spread throughout the world and how it will return in the end times. This is a secret reality that will be revealed only in the end times. And this Babylon is a symbol of all of the worldly resistance there is left to God at that time. Everything that is left on the table that is still able to resist God will be balled up into this mystery Babylon. She is described as being great because she has far-reaching influence. In fact, so great is her influence that she is the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. She is the personification of evil. And Babylon will be the source then. This system will be the source. And this system in reality has been the source since the fall in the garden. This is the source of all false, adulterous, blasphemous worship in the end times. And her designation as the mother of harlots is appropriate, since harlotry in Scripture always symbolizes idolatry. Okay? So Babylon, the city that spawned, the Tower of Babel, spawned the system that corrupted the world with false religion, will do so again under the name, under the system, Mystery Babylon, and ultimately there will be a city of Babylon which will be the center of this evilness.
Of the thought process?
Well,
of the city itself?
I believe that the city of Babylon will also rise again. That will be part of the Antichrist reconstruction project. As the world disintegrates around him, the Antichrist will try to rebuild it. Because the Antichrist wants to create a new world under his direction. He wants to create a world. He didn't get to create the first world. He got to destroy it, its perfection. But he has a desire to create a new world. So like many harlots, then, this woman is described as being drunk. But she's not drunk from intoxicating alcoholic beverages. In a graphic indictment of her for her murderous persecution of God's people, the Babylonian harlot is pictured. She is drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. That's what she's drunk on. She has killed so many saints and so many of the martyrs of Jesus that she has become intoxicated with their blood. And this is a vivid expression and that vividness was commonly used into, that's where we get the phrase, a taste for blood. It's a phrase used in the ancient world to speak of a murderous lust for violence. Some commentators will make a big deal out of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. They can write volumes on the distinctness of the two groups. The former being the Old Testament saints and the latter the New Testament saints. I don't make a big deal about it. The two descriptions refer to people that have met their ends the same way, all at the hands of Mystery Babylon. And it describes really what you have in those two groups are God's people throughout history. Okay? From the garden, all the way, through Polycarp, through these people that are being massacred overseas, these young Christian girls that are being taken from schools because the Muslims don't want them educated, and they're being taken from schools, and these are girls that are 12 and 13 years old. They're being sold into sex slavery. And the United States, the bastion of freedom in the world, sends 10 men to help 300 little girls. And I know a lot of people don't think we need to stick our nose in stuff, but I tell you what, if somebody don't stick their nose in stuff, there isn't going to be any goodness left in the world. So the important point is that false religion, which is represented here by the harlot, is in fact a murderer. Okay? False religion, listen to me. False religion, cults, these religions that aren't based on salvation by Jesus Christ, who is the only way, these religions are murderers. And you need to recognize that, because they lead people to eternal damnation. That's what they do. And it has killed these, in this instance now, we're talking about believers who have been killed. But the same is said for this false religion, which has taken millions of people, and some of them given them great sense of security in their relationship with the Lord.
Yes, and it's happening in our churches today.
I know. So the history of the church has demonstrated that apostate Christianity is relentless in the persecution of those who hold true to faith in Jesus Christ. When the world false religion begins, there will be a lot of Christian churches that will begin persecuting Christians, real Christians. They'll do it, I think, out of an intent to show their loyalty to the new world religion. And then as the world religion flourishes, they'll come under a different umbrella. While the world becomes drunk with its lust for the new harlot, the harlot will become drunk with the blood of God's people. This vision is so appalling. John uses, the words in English are very, they can't properly express what John saw or what he felt. It says that he marveled with great amazement. And that's really, in the Greek, that's an expression of somebody who is confused, somebody who's shocked to the point of being astonished, and somebody that's very, very frightened. The words indicate that. It's a ghastly vision, and it contrasts you have this, one thing you need to understand about the harlot, she's very attractive. She's not ugly. She's very attractive. So you have this magnificent appearing harlot who has death and destruction on her heart. Okay? And so next week we'll look at the explanation of the harlot, which will close the harlot, and then we'll start looking at Semiramis and the Tower of Babel, and we'll look at Nimrod and the foundations of this false world religion. Questions?